good evening. Or good night, more likely, for if you have found your way here at all, you have most likely come to the far end of a long day, with the lamps turned low and the world outside gone still, wanting nothing more now than a quiet voice and a slow story to carry you gently down into sleep. Wherever you are, however you are lying tonight, you can let yourself begin to settle. There is nothing left that needs doing, nothing to finish, nothing to decide, nothing at all that cannot wait in perfect safety until the morning comes. You have arrived at the hour that belongs to rest, and you are allowed to sink all the way down into it, slowly, without any hurry at all. So let your breath begin to slow. Draw one easy breath in, and let it out even more slowly than it came, and feel as you do the weight of your body settling into whatever holds it, the mattress beneath you, the pillow under your head, the blanket drawn up warm. Let your shoulders come down from wherever the day has carried them. Let the small muscles of your face grow soft. Let your hands lie open and loose. There is nothing you need to grip tonight, nothing you must hold on to, and so you can let it all go, a little at a time, and simply be still, and listen, and let a quiet voice lead you somewhere far away and long ago, while sleep comes for you in its own good time. Because that is all this is, in the end. A voice in the dark, and a long story told slowly, and a soft place for your mind to wander until it grows too heavy and too peaceful to wander any further. You do not need to remember a single word of it. You do not need to follow the thread or hold on to the names or keep track of where we are going. If you drift off long before the end, then you will have done exactly the right thing, and the story will still be here, patient and unhurried, waiting for you whenever you return. There is no test at the close of the night. There is only rest, and the slow unwinding of the day, and the deep old comfort of being told a story while you fall asleep. And if your thoughts are still busy, still turning over the day that has passed, or reaching ahead toward the day that is coming, that is all right too. You do not need to push them away or argue with them or hurry them off somewhere. You can simply let them be, the way you might let the sound of far-off rain be, present at the edges but no longer asking anything of you. Let them soften. Let them settle of their own accord, the way a room grows quiet once everyone in it has finally gone still. There is nowhere you need to be tonight and nothing you need to solve, and so, little by little, your mind can loosen its hold on the day, and let the day float free, and turn instead towards somewhere older, and colder, and stranger, and far more beautiful than anything the day contained. Because tonight, we are going to travel, not across any distance you could measure in miles, and not to any place you could point to on a map, but backward, softly, along the long, slow river of time. We are going to drift back past all the years you can name and all the years your grandparents could name, back past the oldest cities and the oldest stories, back past the first farms and the first fields, back before anyone had thought to plant a seed or herd a flock or raise a single wall. We are going a very long way indeed, many thousands of years, tens of thousands, into the deep cold heart of the last great ice age. And there, in that vast and frozen world, we are going to spend this night among a people, and among the great animals they lived beside, animals so large and so strange and so magnificent that the world has never quite seen their like again. For this is a story about giants. It is a story about a time when the earth was ruled, if it was ruled by anything at all, by beasts of enormous size, the woolly mammoth with its long curved tusks and its shaggy hanging coat, taller at the shoulder than a tall man could reach, the woolly rhinoceros moving low and heavy through the grass, the giant deer whose antlers spread wider than a person is tall, the great cave lions and cave bears, the wild horses and the bison in their thundering herds. And it is a story about a small band of people who lived among all of that, who woke each morning into a world of animals far bigger and far stronger than themselves, and who did not run from it, and did not hide from it forever, but learned to live within it, to walk beside the great herds, to know them, to follow them, to take from them what they needed to live, and to hold them all the while in a kind of awe and gratitude and fear that we can still feel the shape of, all these long ages later, in the marks they left behind. They were people exactly like us. That is worth setting down gently at the very beginning, before we go any further, because it is easy to get it wrong. It is easy when we imagine people from so unthinkably long ago to picture something less than fully human, something stooped and grunting and dull, half animal, staring blankly out of a cold and empty life. But that picture is simply not true, and letting it go is part of settling into this night. The people we are going to spend these hours with had the same bodies we have, the same hands, the same eyes, the same deep and dreaming minds. They loved and grieved and laughed and wondered exactly as you do. They were not clumsy beginners fumbling toward humanity. They had arrived. In every way that matters, they were us, only set down in a world so different from ours that we can hardly picture it. A world of ice and grass and enormous animals and enormous skies. And so, over the hours ahead, we are going to move slowly through that world, in no hurry at all, the way the world itself moved then. We will stand first in the great cold grassland that stretched across half the earth, and feel the wind of it, and the size of it, and see the herds moving far off under an endless sky. We will meet the great beasts themselves, one by one, and take our time with each, for they are the true heart of this story. We will learn how the people watched them, and followed them, and read the land for the signs of them. We will go, gently and without any dwelling on hardness, on the long patient business of the hunt, and see how much more it was about knowledge and cooperation and respect than about danger. We will watch the whole band gather to share what the great animals gave, and see how nothing at all was wasted, how a single mammoth became meat and warmth and clothing and shelter and tools and beauty, all at once. We will step inside the astonishing houses these people built from mammoth bones out on the treeless plain. We will sit by the winter fire while patient hands carve small marvels from ivory and lift the oldest flutes in the world to play in the long dark, and at last we will go down, carefully, with a small flame in our hands, into the deep painted caves, where these people set the great beasts upon the stone walls with a tenderness and a skill that can still stop your breath. You do not need to hold any of that in your mind. I only lay it out so you can feel the soft shape of where we are drifting, not a single day this time, but a whole world, and a whole way of living within it, walked slowly from the cold open plain down into the painted dark. And through all of it, remember, this is meant only to carry you towards sleep. Some of what I will tell you is well known, drawn carefully from the things these people left behind in the frozen ground and on the cave walls. Their tools, their hearths, their houses of bone, their carvings, their paintings, their buried dead. Some of it we can only imagine, softly and honestly, filling the long silences of the deep past with what a human life among such animals must surely have held. And where we are only imagining, or where the scholars themselves still wonder and disagree, I will say so, gently, because there is a quiet pleasure in wondering, and no need at all to pretend we know more than we do. For now, though, there is nothing to wonder about and nothing to know. There is only this room, and the dark around you, and your own slow breathing, and a voice carrying you back across an unimaginable stretch of years toward a cold, bright morning at the edge of the ice. Let the day you have lived slide away behind you. Let tomorrow stay where it is, far off and unneeded. You are here, warm and held and safe, and there is all the time in the world, because time, tonight, is exactly the thing we are setting down. So let us go back, together, slowly, into the great cold world of the first hunters and the giants they lived among, and let us begin where their whole world began, out on the endless grass, under the wide pale sky, in the country of the mammoths. To understand these people at all, and the great beasts they lived beside, you must first feel the world they lived in, for it was not our world. It wore the same continents, more or less, and turned under the same sun, and yet if you could stand within it now, you would hardly know the earth at all. This was the Ice Age, the last long spell of deep and abiding cold. That reached its fiercest depth some 20,000 years ago, and lay across the world for many thousands of years on either side of that. And the first thing to understand about it, the thing that shaped everything else, is the ice itself. Far to the north, over what is now Canada and much of the top of Europe, there lay ice, not a winter's ice that melts in spring, but ice miles deep and continent-wide vast frozen sheets that had built up over tens of thousands of years until they buried whole lands beneath them, grinding slowly southward, swallowing the north of the world under a white that went on past the edge of sight. So much of the world's water was locked up in that ice that the seas themselves drew back, sinking far below where they lie today. And where there are shallow seas now, there was dry land then, great plains uncovered by the fallen waters, joining lands that are islands and separate coasts in our own time. You could have walked from the mainland of Europe out to what is now Britain across dry ground where the sea now rolls. You could have crossed from the far east of Asia into the Americas over a wide cold plain where only water lies today. The map of the world was drawn differently, its lands stitched together in places we now think of as forever apart, and across that redrawn earth the people and the animals moved freely, following the grass and the herds wherever they led. And it was cold. It is easy to say the word and let it pass, but let yourself feel it for a moment, softly, from the safe warmth of where you lie. This was a cold that shaped every hour of a life. The winters were long and dark and bitter, the wind coming down off the ice with nothing to break it, driving the snow before it across the open ground. Even the summers were brief and cool, a short green breathing space before the cold came down again. To live here at all, a body needed fire and shelter, and above all clothing, good clothing, fitted and sewn and layered, warm hides closed tight against the wind, and we will come to how they made it. But hold, for now, just the fact of the cold, pressing in at the edges of everything, the constant companion of every person and every animal in this whole vast world. It was the weather they were born into and died in, and they knew it the way you know the air, and they had learned, over uncountable generations, exactly how to live within it. And yet, and this is the wonder of it, the thing that surprises us most, this cold world was not empty, and it was not barren. Quite the opposite. Across the enormous stretch of land that lay south of the ice, from the shores of the Western Ocean clear across Europe and Asia, and over the joined land into the Americas, There spread the largest grassland the earth has ever known. The scholars have given it a name. They call it the Mammoth Steppe, after its greatest inhabitant, and it was a kind of country that does not quite exist anywhere in the world today. It was cold and dry and swept by wind, and yet it was rich, a vast rolling plain of grasses and low herbs and hardy flowering things, stretching unbroken across thousands of miles, greening in the short summers into a pasture wide enough to feed the giants. There were few trees out on the open steppe, or none at all. The wind and the cold and the dryness kept them to the sheltered valleys and the river margins. But the grass grew, season after season, and where the grass grew, the great herds came to graze, and where the great herds came, the people followed. And this world had its seasons, though they were not the gentle 4 that we know. There was above all the long winter and the short summer, and the great turning between them shaped every life upon the plain. Through the long months of cold the land lay locked and white, the grass buried, the rivers stilled beneath their ice, the daylight shrunk to a few pale hours, the animals grown thick in their winter coats, and moving slowly to spare their strength. And then, for a little while, the world would soften, the sun would climb higher and linger longer, the snow would draw back from the slopes that faced it, and the plain would flush green almost overnight, the grasses and the low bright flowers rushing up to live their whole short lives in the brief warm window before the cold came down again. The rivers would break their ice and run high and grey with meltwater. The herds would fatten. The birds would come north in their countless thousands to nest along the marshes and the meres. It was a world of great extremes, of deep cold and sudden brief abundance, and the people and the animals alike lived by reading it truly, knowing when the thaw would come, and when the herds would move, and when the short summer's gifts must be gathered and stored against the long, hard dark ahead. And though the open steppe was the great stage of that world, the people did not live only upon its bare face. They knew the softer country too, the sheltered river valleys that cut across the plain, where the wind fell away and a few trees might grow, willow and birch and pine in the most favoured places, giving wood for fires and for tools, and where the game came down to drink and the fishing was good. These valleys were the veins of that world, the threads of shelter and water and life running across the vast cold plain, and it was along them, as often as not, that the people made their camps and built their houses and walked their long ways through the land. And over all of it, on the clearest and coldest of the winter nights, there would sometimes come a thing so strange and so beautiful that we can only imagine what they made of it. The great silent curtains of the northern lights. The sky itself shivering into slow rivers of green and rose and pale gold, hanging and folding and drifting across the enormous dark above the sleeping plain. They would have watched it, surely as we would watch it, faces turned up in wonder, and folded it into their stories, and it would have seemed to them, as perhaps it truly is, one of the deep mysteries of the roof of the world. Picture it, if you like, as you lie there in the warm dark. A plain so wide that a person standing on it could turn all the way round and see nothing but grass running out to meet the sky in every direction. The wind moving over it in long, slow waves, the way it moves over the sea, silvering the grass and laying it down and lifting it again, the sky enormous overhead, pale and clear and high, or heavy and grey with the promise of snow. And out across that immensity, small in the distance, the dark shapes of animals, a herd of horses grazing along a slope, a scatter of bison, and further off, unmistakable even at that distance by their size and their slow rolling walk, the great forms of the mammoths, moving in their family bands across the plain that carried their name. This was the world. This was the whole of it. grass and sky and wind and cold, and the great animals moving through it, and here and there, following them, watching them, no larger against that hugeness than a handful of dark specks by a thread of smoke. The people, and this was no brief moment in the world's story. No passing scene soon changed. This cold world of grass and giants endured for an immense stretch of time, not for centuries, but for many thousands of years, through age upon age, longer by far than all the time that has passed since. Generation after generation of people was born into it, lived a whole full life within it, and lay down to rest in it, and for the most part the world they left behind them was the very world they had entered. The same herds moving across the same plain under the same wheeling stars, the same skills passed down, the same great beasts drawn upon the walls by the children's children's children of those who had drawn them before. There is something deeply steadying in that, something worth resting on as you drift. We live in a world that changes so fast it can scarcely be kept up with, where a single life may see the whole face of things remade. Theirs did not. Theirs turned slowly, in great deep circles, the same shape of life repeating gently down the ages, so that a person might feel, and with good reason, that the world had always been so and always would be. The grass and the herds and the cold and the fire and the people, turning together through the long unhurried centuries, as changeless and as patient as the stars. There is something in the sheer scale of it that quiets the mind to think of. We live now in a world grown small and close, carved into rooms and roads and fields with edges, a world where the horizon is nearly always blocked by something we have built. But their world had no edges that a person could reach. It opened out on every side, more of it always beyond the last rise, the grass and the sky going on further than any life could walk. And they lived out under the whole of it, beneath that vast sky by day, and beneath the blazing crowded stars by night, small and warm and few, a band of people moving through an immensity of cold open country, at home in it the way we are at home in our small warm rooms, because it was the only world they had ever known, and they had learned it, and loved it, and made their whole lives within it. Let that great plain open in your mind now, wide and cold and silver under the moving sky, and let us go down into it, closer, toward the animals themselves, toward the giants who gave this whole lost world its name. So let us meet them, the great beasts, and take our time about it, for they are the ones this story most belongs to, and there is a deep, slow pleasure in simply calling them up, one by one, out of the deep past, and letting each of them stand before us for a while in the mind's eye. Set aside any hurry. We are only going to look at them, the way you might stand a long time before each animal in some vast and silent gallery, and let their size and their strangeness and their beauty settle into you. For these were animals larger and stranger than almost anything alive in the world today, and to the people who lived among them they were not curiosities and not monsters, but neighbours, known and named and watched all the days of their lives. Begin with the greatest of them, the one whose name the whole plain still carries, the woolly mammoth. Picture it standing there in the grass, and let it be as large as it truly was, a great elephant of the cold, standing as tall at the shoulder as the ceiling of a room, its head domed and high, its back sloping down behind. But this was no elephant such as we know now. This was an elephant dressed for the ice, wrapped in a long shaggy coat of dark hair that hung down its flanks nearly to the ground, with a dense soft wool beneath it against the deepest cold, and a high mound of fat upon its shoulders like a camel's hump, a store of food and warmth against the hungry winters. Its ears were small, far smaller than a warm country elephant's, drawn in close to lose as little heat as it could, and from its face curved the tusks, long, sweeping, spiralling tusks of solid ivory, curving out and up and inward, longer than a person is tall, sometimes crossing at the tips, tusks it used to sweep the snow from the grass and to spar with its rivals and to defend its young. They lived, as far as we can tell, much as elephants live now, in small family herds of mothers and daughters and their calves, led by the oldest and wisest female, the great matriarch, who carried in her long memory the map of the whole country, where the water was, where the grass grew soonest, where the herd must go when the season turned. The bulls wandered apart, alone or in loose bands, and came to the herds only in their season, and so the mammoth moved across the plain in these close family groups, the calves sheltered in the middle, the great matriarch leading, a slow procession of giants under the wide sky. To see them even in the mind is to feel something turn over quietly in the chest. They were the soul of that world, and the people knew it. Near them, but not the same, moved another great tusked beast that the people of some lands knew well, the mastodon. It is easy to muddle the two, and for a long time even the learned did, but they were different animals with different lives. Where the mammoth was a grazer of the open grass, the mastodon was more a browser of the woodlands and the wet forest edges, a little lower and heavier and more thick-set, its tusks straighter, its teeth made not for grinding grass, but for crushing the twigs and leaves and branches of the trees. In the forests and the marshy valleys, especially across the lands we now call the Americas, the mastodon fed among the trees while the mammoth ranged the open plain, two great cousins sharing a cold world between them, each keeping to the country that suited it best. And moving low and heavy through the same grass came the woolly rhinoceros, another beast wrapped against the cold in a thick shaggy coat, broad and massive and close to the ground. It carried two horns upon its face, one behind the other, and the front horn was a great flattened blade of a thing, long and curved and worn smooth along its lower edge, for the rhinoceros, like the mammoth, is thought to have swept it side to side to clear the snow from the winter grass. It was a solitary, short-tempered creature, best given a wide berth, and the people surely gave it one. And yet they knew it intimately all the same, for they drew it again and again upon the cave walls with a care that shows how closely they had watched it. And there were the great deer. Chief among them, and one of the most breathtaking animals ever to walk the earth, was the giant deer, that some call the Irish elk, though it was neither only Irish nor truly an elk. Picture a great stag, tall and powerful, and then picture upon its head a spread of antlers so vast it hardly seems possible. Antlers that could span as wide as a small room is broad, wider than a tall man lying down, great palmed sweeps of bone that the stag grew fresh each year and cast off and grew again, carrying that enormous crown upon its head through the forests and the open ground. And there was the reindeer in its countless thousands, less grand than the giant deer but far more important to the people, for the reindeer moved in great migrating herds that crossed the land with the seasons, and where they passed they were, for many of these bands, the very staff of life. There were red deer in the wooded places, and the elk we now call the moose in the northern marshes, and the roe deer in the thickets, a whole tribe of antlered animals moving through the cold country. And the wild cattle, the aurochs, the great ancestor of all our tame cattle, but wild and enormous, a bull standing far taller and heavier than any farm bull now, black-coated and long-horned and formidable, moving through the valleys and the open woods. And the bison, the steppe bison in herds that could darken a hillside, shaggy and humped and horned, grazing the open plain in their multitudes. And everywhere the wild horses, not the tall horses we know now, but sturdy, thick-necked, dun-coloured ponies with stiff dark manes, moving in bands across the grass, swift and wary and beautiful, the animal the people painted more than almost any other, as though they simply loved the look of them. And the muskox, low and immensely woolly, standing its ground against the wind, and the wild arse, and the saiga with its strange soft nose, and the great elk, and more. And where there are herds, there are hunters, and the people were not the only ones. They shared this world with predators as great and terrible as the prey. There was the cave lion, larger than the lions of the warm south today, a huge pale powerful cat that hunted the herds of the steppe, and that the people painted with such attention we can see they had studied it long and closely, and with no small awe. There was the cave bear, a bear of great size, heavy-headed and mostly a peaceful eater of plants, who denned and slept the long winters away deep in the very caves the people sometimes wished to shelter in, so that the two must sometimes have met at the cave mouth in the dark. There was the cave hyena, hunting in packs and gnawing the great bones. There were wolves, moving over the plain in their families as they do still. To live here was to share the country not only with giants, but with great fanged hunters, to know that the same herds you followed were followed also by lions and by wolves, and to keep always one watchful eye upon the edges of the firelight in the dark. And it was not only in the cold north of the old world that the giants walked. Far across the earth, on the great joined lands we now call the Americas, reached in time across that same wide cold plain where the seas had drawn back, there moved beasts as grand and as strange as any on the mammoth steppe, and the people who came at last into those lands walked among them too. There were mammoths there as well, and mastodons in the woodlands, and there were creatures found nowhere else in the world, the giant ground sloths, huge shaggy beasts that reared up on their hind legs to pull down the branches of the trees, as tall as a house when they stood, the great armoured things, like armadillos grown to an enormous size, plated over in bone, the short-faced bear, long of leg and immense, among the greatest bears that ever lived, the long-fanged cats, and herds of wild horses and camels that once lived and thrived upon those plains, though the world would later lose them there entirely. Wherever the people spread across the earth in those cold ages, they seem to have found it so, a world stocked with giants, a world in which humankind was very far from the largest or the strongest thing, and had to make its patient way among creatures that dwarfed it on every side. And there is one more thing to feel about that world before we leave the animals, and it may be the hardest of all for us to truly grasp, living as we do in an emptied age. It is the sheer abundance of it. We are used now to a world in which the great wild animals are rare and precious things, glimpsed seldom, clinging on in the few wild corners we have left them. But that was not the world these people knew. Their world teemed. The herds were vast beyond our easy imagining, horses and bison and reindeer in their untold thousands, moving across the plain in numbers that could take a day and more to pass, the ground trembling faintly with them, the air full of their sound and their smell. The great cold grassland was one of the richest pastures the earth has ever grown, and it fed a weight and a multitude of large animals that has perhaps never been equalled since. To stand upon that plain was to stand in the very midst of a living abundance we have almost no memory of, a world thick with giants, loud with life, generous past all counting to those who knew how to live within it. Hold that softly, as one of the deep truths of their world. They were few, and the great animals were many, and the earth around them brimmed and thundered with life. Hold them all together for a moment, this great company of beasts, and feel the wonder of it. A whole world of animals grand beyond our common experience. Mammoths and mastodons and woolly rhinos, giant deer and wild cattle and bison and horse, lions and bears moving among them, all of it alive at once, all of it real, all of it walking the same cold earth beneath the same stars. This was not a picture in a book to the people we are speaking of. This was the world outside the shelter. These were the animals they woke to and slept near and walked among every single day of their lives. And it is small wonder, when you think of it that way, that these great beasts filled not only their bellies and their houses, but their minds and their dreams and their deepest art. For how could a person live in the midst of such creatures and not be filled, all their life long, with a great and abiding wonder at them? Now, to live among such animals was, before it was anything else, to watch them. And this is where we should begin to draw close to the people themselves. For if there is one thing above all that set them into the very grain of that world, it was the depth and patience of their watching. We tend to think of these first hunters, when we think of them at all, as figures of action. The raised spear, the sudden charge, the moment of danger. But the truth of their days was quieter and far more beautiful than that. Most of the life of a hunter was not the hunt. It was the long, patient, unhurried reading of the animals and the land, a watching so deep and so continual that it became a kind of second nature, a way of being awake in the world that we have very nearly forgotten how to do, for the herds were always moving, and to live with them was to move too. The great animals of the steppe did not stay put. They followed the grass, and the grass followed the seasons, greening here in the spring and drying there in the summer, buried under snow in one place and blown clear in another. The reindeer above all were great travellers, pouring across the land in their thousands along paths worn by generations of hooves, down from the high summer grounds toward the sheltered winter country and back again with the turning year, as regular in their comings and goings as the return of the birds. The horses drifted with the pasture. The mammoth herds ranged wide under the guidance of their old matriarchs, who carried the memory of the whole country in their heads. And so the people, who lived by these animals, learned the movements of the herds as intimately as they learnt the faces of their own children, and shaped their own wandering year around them. Here when the reindeer crossed the river, there when the horses gathered in the valley, moving with the animals through the seasons in a long, slow dance that had no beginning and no end. Of all the great travellers of that world, none shaped the lives of the people more than the reindeer, and for many of these bands the reindeer were quite simply the centre of everything. Twice in the year the great herds moved, pouring across the land in their countless thousands along paths worn deep by the hooves of countless generations before them, flowing down from the high open grounds toward the sheltered winter country as the cold came on, and back again toward the heights as the short summer returned, and the people moved with them, or gathered to meet them at the river crossings and the narrow places where the herds could be found in their multitudes, timing their whole year around these great comings and goings, as surely as we time our lives around the turning of the days. The reindeer gave them very nearly everything, the meat and the fat, the hides for the warmest and finest of clothing, the antler and the bone and the sinew, so that a whole way of living was built upon the back of this one patient travelling animal, and the rhythm of the herd's migration became the very rhythm of the human year. To live so was to live in the deepest partnership with an animal, matched to its movements, leaning upon its faithfulness, following it across the seasons in a companionship so old and so close that the line between the people and the herd they followed must, at times, have seemed very thin indeed. To do this, They had to be readers of the land, and the land was a book written in signs so faint that our eyes would slide right over them. A hunter walked with attention spread wide and eyes cast down, and the ground itself became a long unfolding story. Here a track pressed into the soft earth beside the water, and from it a whole tale could be read. How large the animal, from the size of it. Which animal, from its shape, for the round pad of a lion, and the split hoof of a bison, and the great dished print of a mammoth, were as different to them as different handwriting. Which way it had gone, and how long ago, for a fresh track has sharp, clean edges, and an old one crumbles and softens, and a track filling with water or dusted with blown grass has its own quiet clock. Whether the animal walked calm or moved in fear, from the spacing and the depth of the steps, whether it went alone or with others, and how many, and whether there were young among them. A bent and bruised stem of grass where a heavy flank had brushed. A rubbed patch of bark on a lone tree where a great beast had eased an itch. A scattering of droppings which a hunter would break open and consider without the least distaste, reading in them what the animal had eaten and how lately it had passed. From 100 small quiet signs, gathered and weighed, the people built in their minds a living picture of an animal they had not yet even seen, where it was heading, how it fared. This was knowledge as fine and as hard won as any we prize now, and it was held not in any book but in the mind and the eye and the long-trained attention of people who had been learning to read the land since they were small children at their elders' heels. And more than the signs upon the ground, they knew the animals themselves, their natures, their habits, their moods, the whole character of each kind of beast. They knew that the mammoths were slow to anger but terrible when roused, and that a matriarch would put herself between any danger and the calves. They knew that the horses were nervous and swift and would break and run at a strange scent on the wind, and so a hunter learned always to come at them from downwind, moving low, using the folds of the ground. They knew where the bison liked to water, and when the reindeer would come to the river crossings, and how the wild cattle would behave when cornered. They knew the great predators too, and gave them their due, where the lions lay up in the heat of the day, how the wolves worked a herd, which caves the bears had denned in for the winter and so must be left well alone. This was not knowledge from a distance. It was the knowledge of people who had spent every day of their lives in the close company of these animals, watching them feed and rest and play and fight and tend their young, until they knew them almost as they knew one another, not sentimentally, not tammily, but truly, deeply. The way you can only know a creature you have lived beside your whole life long. And all of this deep knowing had to be passed on, from those who held it to those who would come to need it, and here too there was a great gentleness. There was no school upon the plain, no set lesson, and no appointed teacher. There was only the walking together, day upon day, the child at the elder's side from the time it could first keep up, watching, listening, asking, being shown. Here the elder would say, though perhaps never quite in so many words, this is the track of the horse and this the track of the reindeer. Here is where the herds will cross when the days grow short, this is how you read the wind. And the weather, and the look of the far sky. And the child would watch, and try, and slowly, across the years, the knowledge would settle into it, not as a thing learned from words, but as a thing grown into the very bones, until one day the young one simply knew the land and the animals the way the old ones knew them, and would carry that knowing forward in turn, patiently, to the children who came after, for they read the sky as closely as they read the ground. They knew the weather in the feel of the air, and the shape of the clouds and the turning of the wind, knew when a storm was coming down off the ice in time to seek shelter, knew the signs of the thaw and the signs of the first hard freeze. and they read the great slow turning of the year in the stars themselves, in the coming and going of the bright ones with the seasons, in the height of the sun and the length of the shadows, so that they always knew, without any calendar but the sky, where they stood in the long wheel of the year, when the herds would move, when the rivers would open, when the short summer's gathering must begin, when to turn back at last toward the winter houses. Their whole life was tuned to these turnings, matched to the deep slow rhythm of the animal year, and they lived inside that rhythm as easily and as surely as you live inside the quiet rhythm of your own days. There is a particular kind of peace in imagining this as you lie there drifting. Picture a hunter come to rest on a low rise in the long light of a summer evening, settled quietly in the grass, doing nothing at all but watching a herd of horses graze along the slope below, not stalking them, not yet, and perhaps not at all that day. Simply watching, learning which mares led and which were heavy with foal, how the herd drifted and turned, where it seemed to be heading as the light failed, so that tomorrow, or the day after, or some day yet to come, the knowledge would be there, ready when it was needed. There would have been hours upon hours of this, whole slow days of it, spent in patient observation that asked for nothing and hurried toward nothing. It was work, and it was survival, and it was also surely a deep and quiet pleasure, the same pleasure we still feel faintly when we sit and watch animals move about their lives, that stilling of the restless mind, that settling of the attention onto something outside ourselves. They had it all day, every day, as the very texture of their lives, and something in us remembers it, and longs for it, still. And so the following of the herds shaped the whole rhythm of a life. The band moved when the animals moved and settled when the animals settled, camping through the reindeer season near the great crossings, wintering where the shelter and the game and the firewood could be found, always reading the country and the weather and the movements of the great beasts, always a little ahead in their minds of where the animals would be. It was a life lived in deep partnership with the animal world, not above it, and not entirely within it, but alongside it, matched to its rhythms, tuned to its turning. The people and the herds moving together across the vast cold plain through season after season after season, in a slow and ancient companionship, older than any memory, older than any word. And so we come, gently to the hunt itself, but let us come to it softly, and set down first the picture we may be carrying, the one painted for us by 1,000 later tellings, in which a hunter simply lifts a spear and a great beast falls in a single bright heroic moment. That picture is a story told long after the fact, and it leaves out nearly everything that was true. The real hunt was slow, and patient, and uncertain, and it was above all a thing done together, by many people who trusted one another completely, using knowledge far more than force. And it failed, more often than not, and no one thought that a disgrace, for the hunt was only ever one part of how the people were fed. Much of what filled the belly came, even here in the cold, from quieter sources, from fish taken from the rivers, from birds and their eggs, from the hares and smaller game caught in snares, from the roots and berries and seeds that the short bright summers gave. The great hunt was the rarer thing, the thing that when it came brought plenty enough to feed the band for many days, and gave far more than meat besides. And so it was approached not with reckless daring, but with all the patience and skill and care that such a serious thing deserved. And it is worth resting for a moment on those quieter ways of feeding the band, for they were the steady ground beneath the rarer drama of the great hunt, and they went on, gently, all the time. Along the rivers and the lakes there was fishing, with spears and with hooks and gorges of bone, and with woven traps set in the running water, and the patient watching of the shallows for the flicker of a fish. And where the fish ran thick in their season, they were a great and reliable bounty, taken in numbers, dried and stored. There was the taking of birds too, above all in the season when the great flocks came north to nest, when the marshes were loud with them and there were eggs to be gathered warm from the reeds, a perfect food asking nothing but a sharp eye and a gentle hand. There were snares and traps set along the little runs where the hares and the smaller creatures passed, quietly doing their work through the day and the night while the people did other things. And in the short bright summer there was the gathering of the plants, the roots dug from the softened ground, the berries ripening on the low slopes, the seeds and the tender greens, and whatever else the brief warm season gave. It was never only meat that fed them, even here in the cold. It was a whole patient weaving together of everything the land offered, from the river and the reed bed, and the slope and the soft summer earth, and the great hunt was the crown upon it, not the whole of it. To hunt the great animals was, first and last, to think. A band did not simply run at a mammoth or a bison. That way lay only broken bones and empty hands. Instead they used everything they knew, the land, the weather, the wind, the habits of the animal, to turn the odds slowly and quietly in their favour. They read the ground to find the herd. They studied it from a distance, choosing, for the hunt bore hardest, and most gently upon the old, the young, the sick or the straggling, the animal that could be taken with the least danger to everyone. They watched the wind, and worked always to keep it in their faces so their scent would not carry ahead and scatter the herd. And then, when the moment was right, they worked together, each person knowing their part. Some would move quietly out ahead to wait in the places the animal was likely to pass. Others would ease in slowly from behind, not shouting, not charging, but gently pressing the animal to move the way they wished, using the very shape of the land to help them, a narrowing valley, the bank of a river, a patch of soft boggy ground where a heavy beast would slow and mire and struggle. It was less a chase than a kind of patient guiding, a shepherding of the wild toward the chosen place, and it rested entirely on cooperation, on each person holding their part and trusting the others to hold theirs, on the long deep understanding that grew between people who had hunted side by side their whole lives. And when it failed, as it so often did, for the animals were wary and swift, and the land was very wide, no one counted it a shame. The hunters would come home with empty hands, and the band would eat that night from what the fishers and the gatherers and the quiet snares had brought, and tomorrow they would read the land and try again, patient as ever. There was no disgrace in a hunt that came to nothing, because the hunt had never been the whole of how they lived, and because everyone understood in their very bones that the great beasts could not be commanded, only courted gently and over, until the day came when everything aligned. It was a life that taught a deep and easy patience with the world as it was, taking what came when it came, going without when it did not, and trusting always that between the many quiet ways and the occasional great one, the band would be fed. There is a kind of peace in that we have half forgotten, the peace of people who did not expect to master the world, only to live within it well, and who had made their peace, long ago, with its turnings. Their weapons were the work of great skill, and they had grown finer across the long ages. For a very long time there was the spear, at first simply a straight shaft of wood with its point hardened in the fire, later a spear tipped with a head of knapped stone or of sharpened bone, bound tight to the shaft with sinew and pitch, that could pierce far deeper than wood alone. And then came a quiet marvel, so clever it seems almost a secret whispered to them by the world, the spear-thrower, which some call by an old name, the atlatl. It was a simple thing to look at, only a length of wood or antler with a hook at one end to cradle the base of a light-throwing spear. A dart, but held in the hand and swung, it lengthened the arm, adding a second joint to the throw, and it sent the dart flying far faster and further, and with far more force than any bare arm could manage. To watch a skilled hunter use it was to see the whole body uncoil in one long smooth motion, the dart leaping away flat and swift across the grass. And later still, in some places and times, came the bow, quieter yet, letting a hunter loose an arrow from cover without ever rising into view. These were not crude clubs. They were finely made and finely understood, the fruit of long ages of patient improvement, and in skilled hands they were formidable. And yet, for all their skill and all their clever tools, the people knew the hunt was dangerous, and they did not pretend otherwise. To close with an animal so vast was to stand very near to great strength and great fear, and hooves and horns and tusks could end a life in a moment. They carried the memory of those who had not come home, and the marks on their own bodies of the times they had come close, and so there was a great seriousness in it, a hush, a care, and woven all through it, something that we should not pass by too quickly, for it may be the truest thing of all about these people, a deep and genuine respect for the animal itself. We can see it plainly in the paintings they left, where the great beasts are rendered not as enemies or as mere meat, but with such tenderness, such loving and exact attention to the turn of a tusk, or the muscle of a shoulder, or the wary life in an eye, that we cannot doubt they held these creatures as something close to kin. The animal gave its life so the people might live. The people knew it, and felt the weight of it, and seemed to have met that weight, not with triumph, but with a kind of gratitude and awe that we can only guess at now, softly, across all these thousands of years. To take one of the great beasts was a serious and even a sacred thing, and they treated it so. There is one form of the hunt that shows, more than any other, just how patient these people could be, and it is a wonder to rest on even now. It is sometimes called the endurance hunt, or the persistence hunt, and it turned the whole human body into a single slow instrument. For the human body, which is weak and slow in any short burst, holds one strange and quiet gift. We are among the finest long-distance travellers in all the animal world, able to sweat and cool ourselves and simply keep going, hour upon hour, long after a swifter creature must stop and rest from the heat. And so a hunter, or a few of them, might choose an animal and simply begin to follow it, at a steady, unhurried, tireless pace, never quite catching it, never letting it truly rest. The animal would bound ahead and stop to breathe, and just as it began to cool, the walkers would come into view again, and it would move off once more. And so it went, on and on across the country, until at last the animal, overcome not by any wound but by sheer exhaustion, could go no further, and the hunters came to it at a walk. It asked no great strength and no great daring. It asked only that a person keep going, gently and patiently, for a very long time, which is perhaps the truest picture of these people that we have. And when the hunt did succeed, the work was far from over. For a great beast is a mountain of a thing, and what followed was the long labour of many hands, but that labour was also the beginning of the best part, the part where the whole band came together, and where we see most clearly what kind of people these were. So let the hunt rest here, in the quiet after, the animal taken with patience and skill and no small courage, the hunters standing a moment in that hush that surely followed, and then the word going out across the land, carried back to the waiting camp, that tonight, and for many nights to come, there would be plenty. For when a great animal was taken, it did not belong to the one who had thrown the truest spear. This is one of the loveliest things we know about these people, and it is worth holding gently as you drift. The meat and everything else the animal gave belonged to everyone. It was shared out among the whole band, the hunters and those who had stayed behind, the strong and the weak, the children and the old ones, those who had walked all day and those who had not. In many such peoples, the one whose spear had struck home took no special portion at all, and might even give the most away, for the giving itself was the true wealth, the thing that bound the people together and said, without any words, we are one, we rise and fall together, what comes to any of us comes to all. Tomorrow the luck would turn, as luck always turns, and the one who gave today would receive tomorrow, and every soul in the band understood this in their very bones. To share was not charity and never weakness. It was a kind of insurance written in kindness, a way of spreading the good fortune and the hard luck of the world thin enough across everyone that no single person would ever fall right through into ruin. Your wealth, in such a world, was not anything you could hoard. Your wealth was your people, and the goodwill of the band gathered around you was the safest storehouse there could ever be. And so, when the word came, the band went out to the animal, or the animal was brought in piece by piece to the camp, and there began the great sharing out, and with it one of the most quietly astonishing things about these people, a thing worth dwelling on slowly. They wasted almost nothing. Nothing at all, if they could help it. A single great beast was not merely a meal. It was a whole storehouse of everything a life required, and the people had learned, over uncountable generations, to use every part of it, so that one animal became food and warmth and clothing and shelter and tools and thread and beauty, all at once. To watch them work an animal was to watch a kind of deep and reverent thrift, a knowledge of the body of the beast so complete that scarcely a scrap went unused. The meat, of course, first, rich and nourishing, and desperately needed in that cold world, for in such deep cold a body burns through great stores of food simply to stay warm. Much of it was eaten fresh. In the days of plenty that followed a kill, the whole band gathered close and well-fed and content around the fires. But a great beast gave far more meat than even a hungry band could eat at once, and so the rest was saved against the lean days to come, and here the cold itself became a friend, for the frozen ground and the long winter were a larder that never spoiled. Meat was cut into strips and dried, or cached in deep pits dug down into the frozen earth, the permafrost that never thawed, where it would keep through the season like food set by in the coldest of cellars. And the fat, we must not forget the fat, for to us it may seem the least of things, but to them it was among the most precious of all. In that cold, hungry world, fat was warmth and energy and life itself, the richest food there was, and the fat of a great animal was treasured and rendered and eaten and saved, and burned too in simple lamps, a wick of moss floating in a hollow of stone, giving a small steady light and a little warmth in the long dark of the winter shelter. And when a great beast had been taken and the caches were full, there came the days of plenty, and these too were part of how the people lived, and worth resting on gently. For a life in that cold world was not one of constant want. It moved between the lean stretches and the times of abundance, and when abundance came, the people met it with feasting and with joy. The fires would be built high, and the best of the meat roasted and shared around, and the rich marrow cracked from the great bones, that most prized of foods, sweet and nourishing, eaten warm in the glow. There would be more than enough for everyone, the children and the old ones and all, bellies filled to contentment, faces lit and easy in the firelight. And on such nights surely there was music, and there were stories, and there was laughter long into the dark, the whole band gathered warm and well fed and content together. The hard, uncertain business of the hunt set aside for a while in the simple gladness of plenty shared among your own people. These were the good nights, the ones a whole band would remember and speak of, and they came, as such nights always seem to come, all the sweeter for the leaner days that framed them. Then the hide, that great warm skin, scraped clean and worked patiently soft, which became the very thing that let these people live in such cold at all. Clothing, and not rough-draped skins, but fitted, tailored, sewn garments, shaped to the body and closed tight against the wind, trousers and tunics and hooded coats and boots, layered warm, the seams stitched shut with needle and thread. For they had the bone needle, that small and tender marvel. Slender and polished and carefully drilled with a tiny eye, needles have been found that are tens of thousands of years old, worn smooth with long use, and with it, and with thread of split sinew, they sewed clothing snug enough to carry a person through winters that would otherwise have driven them from the land entirely. Someone sat and made that, leaning close in the firelight, drawing the thread through and through, and the warmth of it kept a child alive through the killing cold. There is such quiet love in that, when you rest on it slowly. The hides went too into the coverings of shelters, stretched over frames to make the tents that broke the wind, and into bags and pouches and containers of every kind, and the sinew, drawn from along the back and the legs, was split fine and strong, and became the thread that sewed the clothes, and bound the spear points to the shafts, and lashed together the frames of the houses, a cord so strong and so useful that a whole world of made things depended on it. And there were uses still, for parts of the animal that we might never think of, and the people let none of them fall to waste. The great stomach and the bladder and the long lengths of gut became vessels, bags and skins for carrying water, for storing fat and marrow, for holding all the small necessary things of a life lived on the move, light and strong and given freely by the body of the beast. The bladder blown up and dried made a pouch, the gut, cleaned and dried, made cord and casing, and the tough hide and sinew, boiled slowly down, could yield a strong glue that, together with the sticky pitch rendered from the bark of trees, fixed the stone points fast into their shafts, and mended what had broken. The teeth were pierced and worn as ornaments. The horn and the antler were carved into points and toggles and the smoothers that worked the hide supple, and a taut dried hide stretched across a frame could be struck to make a drum, so that even the music of their gatherings came, in part, from the bodies of the great animals. There was, in the end, scarcely a thing in all their world that did not come, in some way, from the beasts they lived among, and scarcely a part of those beasts that the people did not know, and value and turn to some good use. And the bone, and the ivory, and the antler and the horn, hard materials, shaped and carved into 100 needful things. Points for spears and needles and awls for piercing and scrapers and handles and little toggles and fasteners, and smoothers for working hides, and the spear throwers themselves. And where the animal was a mammoth, there was the ivory of the great tusks, that beautiful pale material, carved and worked with astonishing skill into tools and ornaments and, as we shall see, into small marvels of pure beauty. Even the bones themselves, the great heavy bones, were not wasted when they had given up their marrow, for out on the treeless plain, where there was little or no wood to be found, the people learned to burn bone itself upon their fires, the fat rich bone of the great animals feeding the very flames that warmed them. And the greatest bones of all, the vast skulls and jaws and ribs and tusks of the mammoths, became something more astonishing still, something we will come to soon. The very walls and beams of their houses. Hold the whole of it together for a moment, in the warm dark, and feel the deep completeness of it. A single great animal, taken with patience and shared with love, became the meat in their bodies, and the fat in their lamps, and the clothes on their backs, and the thread in their needles, and the tools in their hands, and the roof over their heads, and the ivory beneath the carver's blade. Nothing was thrown away that could be used, because in that hard and generous world, waste was a kind of forgetting, an insult to the animal that had given everything, and use was a kind of gratitude. There is a wholeness in that way of living that we, surrounded by so much and wasting so freely, can scarcely imagine now, and that is somehow deeply restful to think of, a life in which every part of everything was known and valued and given its full use, and nothing at all was let fall carelessly into waste. The animal gave itself, and the people, in return, let no part of the gift be lost. And so, well fed and warmly clothed, the meat cached in the frozen ground and the hides drying by the fire, the band settled toward the making of a home out on the open plain, a home built, astonishingly, from the very giants that sustained them, out on the open steppe, where the wind came down off the ice with nothing to break it, and there was little wood or none at all to build with. The people did a thing so remarkable that when its traces were first uncovered, those who found them could hardly believe what they were looking at. They built houses out of the mammoths, not merely covered with mammoth hide, though they were that too, but framed and walled and founded upon the very bones of the great beasts, great dwellings raised from tusks and skulls and jaws, and the long heavy bones of the largest animal in their world. To stand where such a house once stood, and to see the ring of mighty bones still resting where patient hands set them down so many thousands of years ago, is to feel the deep past reach up and take hold of you, quietly, and not let go. Let yourself picture how such a house was made, for it was a labour of many hands and no small ingenuity. First they would lay the foundation, a great ring or a rounded square of the heaviest bones, the massive skulls of mammoths set close together, or the lower jaws stacked one upon another in careful overlapping rows, chin down, so that they locked and held. Sometimes arranged in a herringbone pattern that runs around the base of the wall as neat and deliberate as any brickwork. Upon and within this foundation they raised the walls, built up of the long limb bones and the broad flat shoulder blades and the curved ribs and the hip bones of many animals, fitted together with great care, each heavy piece chosen and placed to bear its share of the weight. And over the doorway, and arching up to help hold the whole, they set the tusks, the great curving tusks of the mammoths themselves, crossing overhead, framing the low entrance through which a person would stoop to come in out of the wind. Over all of it they stretched hides, the worked skins of the animals, to make the roof and to close the walls against the weather, and these they weighted down along the edges with yet more bones, so the wind could not tear them free. And there it stood, a round warm house upon the open plain, low and strong and domed, built to hold against the worst that the winter could bring, and built from foundation to roof beam of the giants. Think of the labour in it, and the cooperation. A single such house might use the bones of many mammoths. The great houses that have been found used hundreds of bones apiece, gathered from dozens of animals. And mammoth bones are enormously heavy, far more than one person could lift or carry or set in place alone. So this was work for the whole band together, and more than a season's worth, for it seems the people did not always come by all these bones at once from the hunt. They gathered them too, over long spans of time, from the places where mammoths had died of their own accord, from old bone beds by the rivers where the great skeletons lay, carrying and hauling and stockpiling the heavy bones until there were enough to build. It was a slow and deliberate undertaking, a thing planned and worked toward, and it speaks of people who meant to stay a while, who were making not a shelter for a night, but a home for a season, a fixed warm centre to return to through the long dark of the winter. And these houses did not stand alone. Where their traces have been found, in the lands we now call Ukraine and the plains of Russia, at places whose modern names we need not carry with us into sleep, but which the scholars know well and have studied with great care. They stand in little clusters, several houses together, a small settlement upon the plain, a handful of bone and hide dwellings, grouped close, with the open ground between them worn by feet, and dotted with the hearths where fires burned, and the pits dug down into the frozen earth where meat and stores were kept cold through the winter. This was, in its way, a village, one of the oldest kinds of village there has ever been, a place where several families wintered side by side, each in its round house of bone, smoke rising from the roof holes into the grey sky, the whole small community drawn together on the vast plain against the cold and the dark. Some of these settlements are around 15,000 years old, and some older still, and to think of them is to understand that these were not merely wanderers drifting rootless across the land, but people who built, and gathered, and settled, and made places that were truly theirs. And a settlement like this was a place of fires, and here too the great beasts gave what a treeless plain could not. For out on the open steppe, far from any woodland, there was often little wood to burn, and yet the people needed fire above all things, for warmth, for cooking, for light through the long dark. And so they learned to burn the bone itself, the bones of the mammoths and the other beasts, rich with fat deep in their honeycombed hearts, would burn slowly and hot once a fire was well got going, and so the very bones that were not needed for the building became the fuel that warmed the houses of bone, the animal giving even its skeleton to the flames that kept its hunters alive. Picture the hearths glowing within, and among the little cluster of dwellings, the smoke rising from the roof holes into the winter dark, the smell of it drifting across the snow, the small steady warmth of bone-fed fires holding the great cold at bay across the whole quiet settlement. And sunk into the frozen ground around, and beneath the houses there were the storage pits, dug down with great labour into earth as hard as stone, for the ground here never fully thawed, and a pit driven down into that frozen earth was a larder that held its cold all year long, a deep cold cellar given free by the land itself. Into these the people packed the meat of the great hunts, the surplus of the days of plenty, and it kept there through the seasons, frozen and safe. A store of life laid by against the hungry stretches of winter, when no herd could be found. To dig such a pit into ground so hard was no small work, and that the people did it again and again tells us how settled and how deliberate this winter life could be. A life of laying in and storing up, of thinking ahead across the seasons, of returning year upon year to the same good place by the same sheltered river to build, and to mend, and to winter over. And so, through the deep of the winter, the little settlement of bone lived its close warm life upon the vast white plain. Smoke rose from the houses, fires burned within. The people came and went between the dwellings along paths worn into the snow, tending the caches, mending their gear, working hides and carving ivory in the shelter of the walls, the children playing in the lee of the great curved bones. It was not a wandering life at all in this season, but a gathered and a rooted one, a true home upon the plain. And when at last the long winter loosened its hold, and the herds began again to move, and the short green summer came round once more, the people would leave their houses of bone still standing, and follow the animals out across the waking land, and come back, when the cold came down again, to winter as their people had always wintered, in the warm heart of the giant's bones. Now step inside one, in your mind out of the wind. Stoop under the arch of tusks and come into the low round room, and feel at once how the wind falls away, how the endless roar of it against the grass is suddenly shut outside, and there is stillness and shelter and the close warm dark. There is a hearth here, near the centre, a fire burning low and steady, and its smoke drifts up and out through a hole left in the roof, and its warmth fills the small space and holds it against the killing cold outside. The walls curve close around, thick and strong, the bones of them perhaps hung with hides for warmth, the floor worn smooth by long use, scattered here and there with the tools and the belongings of the family, the sleeping places soft with furs along the edges. Outside, the winter howls across the plain, and the snow drives past in the dark. In here it is warm and close and safe, and the people are gathered near the fire, and there is nowhere in all that frozen world they would rather be. This was home. This was the still, warm heart at the centre of a hard, bright world, and it was built, every bone of it, from the great animals who gave the people everything. There is something in these houses of bone that reaches very deep, deeper than mere shelter, and it is worth resting on softly as you drift. To build your home from the bodies of the animals you live by is to live in a kind of closeness with them that we can hardly imagine now. The mammoth was not, to these people, some creature glimpsed far off and forgotten. It was the meat in the cache, and the fat in the lamp, and the coat on their backs, and the ivory in their hands, and, quite literally, the roof over their heads, and the walls around their sleep. They were born in houses of mammoth bone, and they slept their whole lives within the curved embrace of those great ribs and tusks, and when at last they closed their eyes for the final time, it was very likely within such walls that they did it. The giants were woven through every hour of their lives, present in the very structure of their homes, holding the wind off their children as they slept. And so let that image settle over you now, warm and strange and beautiful, a little round house of bone and tusk and hide, standing small upon an endless plain of snow, a thread of smoke rising from it into the vast grey sky, and inside, by a low fire, a family gathered warm and safe within the sheltering bones of the great beasts, through the long, long night of the Ice Age winter. And through those long winters, gathered close in the warm dark of the shelters while the snow drove past outside, the people did far more than merely wait for the spring. They made things. This is one of the gentlest and most surprising truths about them, and one worth lingering over slowly as sleep draws near. For with the great animals cached in the frozen ground and the fires burning steady, there were long, long hours to fill, whole dim afternoons and evenings of them, and into those hours the people poured a patient, skilful, tender industry that has left us some of the most moving objects in all the human story. Small marvels of carved ivory and bone, made not for use at all, but for beauty, for meaning, for the sheer deep human pleasure of shaping a lovely thing. Take the ivory first, the pale smooth ivory of the mammoth tusks, for it was a wonderful material to a people with the skill to work it, hard enough to hold a fine shape, soft enough to be carved and ground and polished, and beautiful in itself, warm and creamy and glowing in the firelight. With their small stone blades and their patient hands, over many hours, the carvers shaped it into all manner of things, and among them, astonishingly, into little figures of the animals of their world. Tiny mammoths, carved in ivory no longer than a finger, the great domed head and the sloping back, and the very hang of the shaggy coat captured in miniature by a hand that knew the living animal utterly. Small horses, one of them so beautifully made, its neck arched, and its whole form so alive with the spirit of the animal, that people who see it now, carved perhaps 40,000 years ago, fall silent before it. Lions and bison and water birds with their necks outstretched in flight, and a whole small menagerie of the creatures they lived among, each one shaped with a love and a skill that leap across the ages and take us by the heart. These are among the oldest figures of animals that human hands have ever made, and they were carved here, in the cold, in the firelight, from the ivory of the mammoths, by people filling the long winter with beauty. And they carved more than animals. In one deep and mysterious instance, from a cave in the land we now call Germany and shaped from a single great piece of mammoth ivory, there is a figure that is not an animal and not quite a person, but both at once. A standing figure with the body of a human being and the head of a lion patiently carved, worn smooth by handling, and something close to 40,000 years old. No one can say for certain what it meant. But a figure that is part human and part beast is a figure that came out of the imagination, out of a mind that could picture a thing that does not exist in the world, and then bring it slowly into being with its own hands. A mind that told stories, that dreamed of powers and spirits, that reached past the plain surface of things towards something deeper behind them. It is one of the oldest signs we have of the human capacity for myth, for the sacred, for imagination itself, and it was made here, in this cold world of hunters and mammoths, in the patient winter dark. They carved figures of people too, and above all small figures of women, which are found across an enormous stretch of this ancient world, from the western lands clear across to the plains of the east, small rounded figures, some of ivory, some of stone, some, remarkably, of clay baked hard in the fire, among the very oldest fired things that human hands have ever made. We do not fully know what they meant, these small women, carried and handled and worn smooth, whether they were sacred, or protective, or ancestral, or simply beloved. But they were made with care, and kept, and clearly mattered, and they are another quiet proof of minds and hearts, exactly like our own, reaching out through the making of small meaningful things toward whatever it is that people have always reached for. And they made ornaments, thousands upon thousands of them, and here the labour staggers the mind. They carved beads, tiny beads of ivory, each one shaped and pierced and polished by hand, and they made them in such numbers that some of their dead were laid to rest sewn all over with them, thousands of small ivory beads adorning a single burial. The beads that had once been sewn in their thousands onto clothing to make it beautiful. Think of the hours in that. Think of the patient winter evenings, the small blade turning the scrap of ivory, the tiny hole drilled through with a fine point, the bead set aside and another begun, and another, hundreds of them, thousands of them, until a garment glittered all over with worked ivory. No one makes a bead because they are hungry. No one drills 1,000 tiny beads to survive the cold. They made them because they wished to be beautiful, because they wished to honour their dead, because they wished to say, without any words at all, who they were and to whom they belonged. The urge to adorn, to decorate, to make oneself and one's people lovely to look upon. It is one of the deepest and most human urges there is, and it was here, fully, in the cold, in the firelight, tens of thousands of years ago. And that same love of beauty, and that same patient care, followed these people even beyond the edge of life, into death itself. For they did not abandon their dead. They buried them, gently in the cold ground, and they buried them with love, and often with the very things a life had held dear, the tools and the ornaments and the small beloved goods laid down beside the body as though for a journey. Some of the dead were laid to rest in their finest clothing, adorned with the worked ivory beads that had taken so many patient hours to make, dressed for the grave as richly as for any great occasion of the living, and over them, again and again, the people laid the red ochre, that warm, deep, blood-coloured earth, scattered upon the dead like a covering, like a warmth, like the very colour of life itself, given back to those who had left it behind. We cannot know just what they believed as they laid their dead down so. We cannot hear the words they said over them, or follow the thoughts behind the ochre and the beads. But we cannot look upon such a grave and doubt that these people loved their dead and grieved them deeply and could not bear to send them into the earth without honour and without beauty. Surely they believed in something, some continuing, some going on, some journey for which the dead must be clothed and adorned and given their goods and covered over in the colour of life. The care is unmistakable. The love is unmistakable. And it is one more quiet proof that these were not simple creatures, but people exactly like ourselves, who held one another precious in life and could not say goodbye, in death, without tenderness. To grieve and to honour and to adorn the ones we have lost, to lay them down with beauty and to mark their leaving with care, these are among the deepest and oldest of all the things that make us human. And they were here, whole and entire, in the world of the mammoth hunters, the same firelit hands that carved the little ivory horses and strung the beads and, as we shall hear, lifted the first flutes to play, also dug the graves and scattered the ochre and mourned. It was all one thing, in the end the love of beauty and the love of one another, and the ache of loss and the long reaching towards some meaning behind it all, woven together in hearts exactly like your own, warm in the firelight, in the deep cold of the ancient winter. And through the long dark of those winter nights, gathered close in the shelter while the wind moved over the plain outside, the people did the oldest thing of all. They told stories. We cannot hear those stories now, for the voices that told them fell silent unimaginably long ago, past all our recovering, but we can be as sure as we are of almost anything that they were told, night after night after night, because there has never yet been found a people anywhere on the earth without them. And we can guess, softly, at what filled them. For a people who lived among such animals surely wove those animals through the very heart of their tales. The great beasts must have moved through their stories as they moved across the plain, the mammoth and the lion and the bear, the giant deer and the wild horse, become in the telling something more than themselves, become powers, become ancestors, become the great figures in the stories that made sense of the world. Where did the animals come from, and the people who walked among them? Why must the herds be followed, and the great beasts honoured? What moved behind the turning seasons and the wheeling stars? We have already seen the very sign of such imagining, in that ancient figure carved of ivory that is part human and part lion, a being that never walked the earth, but came instead out of the mind, out of the story, out of the deep human need to picture the powers behind the world and give them a shape. In the long firelit dark, the great beasts were not only hunted and shared and worn and carved, they were dreamed, they were told, they were woven into the meaning of everything, and it is that same weaving, most likely, that would one day carry the people down with their small flames into the painted caves. And they made music. This may be the tenderest thing of all to rest on as you drift towards sleep. For deep in these same lands, in the cold patient earth of the caves, searchers have found flutes, flutes carved with slow and loving care from the hollow wing bones of great birds, and from the pale ivory of the mammoth, pierced with finger holes, set just so, spaced and tuned by a maker who knew exactly what sound they wished to draw out of the silent air. These flutes are around 40,000 years old, the oldest musical instruments that have ever been found anywhere in the world. Turn that number over slowly and gently in the dark, and let it settle. 40,000 years ago, in the long freezing nights of the Ice Age, in a warm shelter by a low fire while the great beasts moved through the dark outside, someone sat down and shaped a hollow bone into an instrument, with patience and skill and love, and lifted it to their lips, and played, filled that small warm space with a melody, a made and deliberate music, and others sat near in the firelight and listened, and were moved by it, exactly as you are moved by music now. That is not the act of a creature merely struggling to survive. That is the act of a human being, wholly and completely, reaching past the bare business of living toward beauty, toward joy, toward the simple sweetness of a shared sound in the dark. Picture it now, softly, as your own thoughts begin to slow, the winter shelter, the fire low and red, the family gathered close, the snow whispering past the hide walls, and one among them lifting a small pale flute of bird bone or of mammoth ivory, and beginning, quietly, to play. The notes rising and falling in the warm dark, the children growing heavy-eyed, the great beasts out in the night, and the people safe within, warm and fed and close, and music, real music, threading through it all. They were makers of beauty, these first hunters, every bit as much as they were takers of great game, and the two were never far apart, for it was the animals who gave them the ivory and the bone, and it was the long dark winters the animals fed them through that gave them the hours to carve and to string and to play. Beauty and survival wound together, warm in the firelight, 40,000 years deep in the human past. And now we come to the deepest and most beautiful thing these people left behind, the thing that more than any other lets us look straight into their hearts across all the long ages, and it lies, fittingly, in the deepest and darkest of places. For to find it, we must leave the firelit shelter and the open plain behind, and go down, carefully, into the earth itself, into the caves. Not the shallow overhangs where the people slept and worked in the light, but the deep places, the true caves that run back and down into the living rock, past the last reach of the daylight, into a darkness so total and so complete that we, who so rarely meet real darkness any more, can hardly imagine it. Into that blackness the people went, with a small flame cupped in their hands, a torch of burning wood, or a little lamp of stone with a wick of moss floating in melted fat, and there, on the cold stone walls, far back in the dark where almost no one would ever come, they painted the great beasts of their world. Picture the going down, softly, the light of the entrance falling away behind, the passage narrowing, the dark closing in, the small flame throwing its trembling glow on the wet stone walls and the low roof, the sound of dripping water somewhere, the cold breath of the deep earth. It would have taken courage and purpose to go so far into the dark. And then, in some chamber deep within, the flame lifted, and there, on the wall, an animal, and not a crude scratch, not a child's stick figure, but a masterwork, a great beast rendered with such life and such power, that even now, even under electric light, even to eyes that have seen every wonder our own age can make, it stops the breath and stills the heart. They painted the horses, above all, again and again, the sturdy dun ponies of the steppe. Their heads and necks caught with a line so sure and so alive, you can feel the very spirit of the animal in it, sometimes a whole frieze of them galloping across the stone. They painted the bison, massed and powerful, and the wild cattle, the great aurochs, and the deer with their branching antlers, and the mammoths with their high-domed heads and their sweeping tusks, and the very hang of their shaggy coats, and the woolly rhinoceroses low and heavy with their great blade-like horns, and the lions, the cave lions, hunting in a pride across the rock, drawn with such close attention to the set of the shoulders and the intent in the face that we know the painter had watched real lions, long and closely, and held them in deep respect. In one cave, deep in the land we now call France, whose paintings are around 36,000 years old, among the very oldest such paintings anywhere in the world, the walls carry lions and rhinos and mammoths and horses of astonishing power and grace, a whole surging gallery of the great beasts, painted when the Ice Age was still in its full depth. In another, younger cave, its great hall glows with enormous painted bulls and horses and stags, a painted chamber so rich and so alive that those who first came into it in our own time fell silent with wonder. In yet another, on a low ceiling, the bison are painted curled and resting, and the painter used the very swellings and bulges of the rock itself to give them roundness and life, so that the stone seems to push out into the shape of a living animal. And in one, deep among the many painted beasts, there run the mammoths in such numbers that people now call it by that very thing, the Cave of 100 Mammoths. They painted with the earth itself. Their colours were the colours of the ground, black from charcoal and from a dark mineral, and the reds and yellows and warm browns of ochre. That iron-rich earth they gathered and ground fine and mixed to make their paint. They drew with charred sticks and with lumps of ochre held like crayons, and they laid on colour with pads and with their fingers, and they blew it too, in a fine mist from the mouth or through a hollow bone, to lay down soft shadow and to make one astonishing thing above all. For here and there among the animals, on the walls of cave after cave across this whole ancient world, they left the prints of their own hands, a hand pressed flat to the cold stone, and then the paint blown all around it, so that when the hand was lifted away its shape remained, a pale hand held forever against the rock in a halo of red or black. Sometimes many hands, together, large and small, the hands of grown people and the hands of children, reaching out of the deep past to press against the same stone. There is nothing in all their long-buried world that reaches across the ages quite so directly as those hands. Someone stood here, in the dark, with a light, tens of thousands of years ago, and pressed their living hand to the wall and left its mark, and that mark is still there, a person, saying, across all that unimaginable time, without any word we could ever read, I was here. I was real. This was my hand. And this was not the work of a single moment or a single people, but a tradition so long that it staggers the mind to hold it. The painting of the deep caves went on in these lands for something like 20,000 years. 20,000 years of people carrying fire down into the dark to set the great beasts upon the stone. A span of time so vast that the whole of our own written history, all our cities and empires and remembered names, would fit within it several times over. And they did not only paint. They engraved too, cutting the outlines of the animals into the rock with sharp stone, and here and there they drew with their fingers alone, trailing them through the soft clay skin of the cave walls in long flowing lines. so that among the great painted beasts there run these softer, more intimate traces, the direct touch of a hand moving slowly over the stone. To come upon such things in the deep silence of the caves, the painted herds, the engraved beasts, the finger-drawn lines, the pale stencilled hands, is to feel the nearness of the makers so strongly that the thousands of years seem to fall away. And you might almost believe they had only just stepped back, a moment before you came, into the surrounding dark, and might be standing there still, just beyond the small trembling reach of your light. And they painted by firelight, which changes everything, and is worth resting on gently. For these animals were never meant to be seen as we see them now, flat and still under a steady even light. They were made to be seen by the moving flame of a torch or a lamp, and by that living, flickering, breathing light they come alive in a way no still light can show. The shadows shift. The forms seem to move. A running horse seems truly to run. A herd seems to surge and turn. The great beasts stir on the walls as the flame wavers, breathing, alive, moving through the dark exactly as they moved across the plain outside. The painters knew this. They used it. They set their animals where the rock would help them, where a bulge became a flank and a hollow became a haunch, and a natural ridge became the line of a back, so that the very stone seemed to swell into the living body of the beast. This was not decoration. This was something far deeper, a bringing of the great animals down into the sacred dark, and a making of them live again there by firelight, in the heart of the earth. And some of these painted places lay very deep, and were very hard to reach, which only deepens the wonder and the mystery of them. To come to the paintings, the people sometimes had to go a long way into the earth, down winding passages, through chamber after chamber, along galleries where the way narrowed so tightly that a person must have crawled on hands and knees, or squeezed through on their belly, pushing the small flame ahead of them into the black. This was no easy stroll to a place of pretty decoration. It was a journey, a descent, an undertaking that asked real effort and real courage. Down into the cold and the dark and the deep silence of the underworld, far from the daylight and the open air and everything safe and known. And having gone to all that trouble, having crawled so far into the dark, they did not scratch some hurried mark and flee. They stayed. They worked. They painted with patience and mastery by the light of their small flames, and only then made the long slow way back up toward the daylight again. Whatever it was that drew them down there, it was something they felt very deeply, something worth the labour and worth the fear, something that mattered to them more than comfort or ease. And that, perhaps, is the truest measure we have of how much the great beasts meant to them, that they would go so far and dare so much, only to set them living upon the stone. And why? Why did they do it? Why go so far into the terrible dark, at such cost and such labour and such courage, to paint the great beasts where almost no living eye would ever see them? This is the question that hangs over all of it, and the honest answer, the one we must be content with, is that we do not know, and perhaps we never will. We can only wonder, softly, as they surely meant us to wonder. Perhaps the deep cave was a holy place, a doorway between this world and some other, and the painting was a kind of prayer, a reaching out toward the great powers that moved unseen behind the animals and the seasons and the wheeling stars. Perhaps it was done to honour the beasts, or to ask their forgiveness, or to call them back, to make the herds return again in the spring. Perhaps the young were brought down into the dark to be shown these things, and so made into full members of the people, carrying the memory of that awesome descent all their lives. Perhaps it was all of these, or none, or things we cannot even imagine from where we stand. We cannot say, but we can say this, and say it with certainty, that someone crawled down into the cold and total dark with a small trembling flame and a deep need to make something true and lasting and beautiful. Something about the great animals who filled their world and their hearts, and that they succeeded so completely that we, their own children 30,000 years and more removed, still stand before their work today with the breath caught in our throats and tears standing quietly in our eyes. So let that be the image you carry down towards sleep now, softly, the deepest and truest thing these first hunters left us. A small band of people, in the heart of the Ice Age, who lived among giants, and who loved those giants, or feared them, or held them sacred, so deeply that they carried fire down into the black roots of the earth to set them upon the stone, alive forever in the flickering light. The horses running, the lions hunting, the mammoths moving in their hundreds through the painted dark, and the pale hands pressed among them, small and large, reaching out of the deep past to touch us still. They were makers of beauty and keepers of wonder, these people, as much as they were hunters of the great beasts, and in the painted caves the two come together at last, forever, the animals and the awe and the human hand that reached out to hold them both. And so, at the last, let us draw slowly back out of the painted dark and up into the light, back out of that whole vast cold world, and let the deep ages carry us gently home toward the present and toward sleep. For that world did not last forever. No world does. And there is a soft sadness in what became of it, but a soft wonder too, and we can let both of them settle over us quietly now, without any grief, the way you might feel about anything beautiful and long ago. The great cold slowly loosened its hold. After many thousands of years, the world began, gradually, to warm. The vast ice sheets that had lain over the north for so long began their slow retreat, melting back over centuries, the seas rising as the water returned to them, the land bridges drowning one by one beneath the climbing waves. And as the world warmed, the great cold grassland, the mammoth steppe, that enormous rolling pasture that had fed the giants for so long, began to change. Forests crept north across the old plains, marsh and bog spread where the dry grass had been. The particular world that the great beasts were made for, the cold, dry, windswept steppe, shrank and broke apart and slowly, over long ages, faded from the earth, and the great beasts faded with it. The mammoths grew fewer, the woolly rhinos, the giant deer with their vast antlers, the cave lions and the cave bears, one kind after another, across long spans of time, thinned and dwindled and at last were gone, until the world that had been so full of giants held them no more. Why it happened exactly, the scholars still wonder, and still gently disagree, and it is right to be honest that we do not fully know. Very likely it was the warming world above all, the changing of the climate that unmade the cold pastures the great beasts depended on, and left them stranded in a world reshaping itself faster than they could follow. And very likely the people played some part as well, for by then there were more people, spread further, hunting more widely, and a pressure that a vast and thriving world of giants could easily bear became perhaps too much for a world of giants already dwindling. It was most likely both together, the changing earth and the growing reach of humankind, and it happened not in a moment but across thousands of slow years, so gradually that no one living through any single lifetime of it would have seen the world change at all. But change it did, and the giants passed, and the earth has never since been quite so full of wonder as it was when they walked it. And yet they are not entirely gone, and this is the soft wonder to hold against the sadness as you drift. For the mammoths lingered far longer than you might think. Long after they had vanished from the Great Plains, small herds of them still lived on, in far and lonely northern places, on remote islands in the cold northern sea, where they held on for thousands of years more. There were still living mammoths in the world, real mammoths, breathing, walking, tending their calves, when the first great cities were already rising far to the south, when the first pyramids were already old. Turn that over slowly and gently in the dark, the last of the giants and the first of the cities, alive in the same world at the same time. The Ice Age is not so unimaginably far from us as it seems. Its great beasts walked the earth almost within reach of the beginning of all our written memory. And they linger still in other ways. In the frozen ground of the far north, in the permafrost that has never thawed, the mammoths sleep, not their bones only, but sometimes their very bodies, whole and perfect. Their flesh and their long hair and their small trunks preserved by the cold across all these thousands of years, so that now and again the melting ground gives one up, a mammoth calf curled as if only sleeping, looking as though it might wake and rise and go looking for its mother. They are still here, in the cold earth, waiting, and they are here on the painted walls, running forever in the flickering dark. And they are here in the small carved ivory figures and in the great houses of bone, and in every trace these people left of the giants they lived among and loved and feared. The world of the first hunters and the great beasts is gone, and yet it has never entirely left us, and it never will. And though we have spoken of the cold, and the danger, and the passing of that whole world, do not carry away with you the thought that their lives were only hardship. They were not. They were full lives, whole lives, rich with all the things that fill a human life in any age at all. There was love among these people, and laughter, and long easy talk beside the fire. There were children born and cherished and taught, growing up safe in the middle of the band, learning the whole wide world at the knees of those who loved them. There were friendships that lasted entire lifetimes, and old ones tended gently to the very end of their days, and songs and stories and feasting in the seasons of plenty. And the deep, quiet contentment of a warm shelter and a full belly and your own people gathered close around you in the dark. They knew wonder, standing small before the great beasts. They knew beauty in the ivory and the ochre and the painted walls. And they knew belonging, which may be the deepest human need of all, and they had it in full and overflowing measure, every one of them, cradled from birth to death in the close warm circle of the band. Theirs was not a poorer life than ours, only a different one, and in some ways perhaps a fuller and a warmer and a more deeply human one than we, in our crowded and hurried age, still quite know how to live. And the people, the small bands of hunters who watched the herds and shared the meat and built the houses of bone and painted the caves, the people did not vanish. The people are us. They are our own direct ancestors, our own grandmothers and grandfathers, reaching back and back through the deep ages. And everything they were is folded down inside us still. When you feel your eyes drawn to a fire and quieted by it, that is them. When you feel the deep comfort of your own people gathered close and warm, with the dark shut safely outside, that is them. When you stand before some great animal, an elephant, a whale, a bear, and feel that mixture of awe and tenderness and a little fear rise up in you unbidden, that is them. That is the oldest feeling there is, the feeling of a small warm human being in a world of giants, and it has never left us, and it never will. You carry the whole of that lost cold world inside you tonight, folded into your blood and your bones and the deep shape of your longings, and it is with you now, quietly, as you rest. So let that be the last soft thought as sleep comes down, that you are the newest leaf on a very old tree, and that behind you, holding you up, stand more people than you could ever count, all the way back to a small band of hunters, warm by their fire in a house of mammoth bone, on an endless plain of snow, under the blazing crowded stars, with the great beasts moving in the dark outside, and a small flute playing softly in the firelight. They lived in a world of giants, and they met it with courage and patience and love and wonder, and they rested when their long day was done, close and warm and safe, exactly as you are resting now. Their long day is over, and has been for a very long time. And your long day is over too. There is nothing more that this day asks of you. Everything is finished, everything is put away, the fire is tended and the dark is kept out, and there is nothing left to do but rest, held by all the quiet ages that made you. Let your body grow heavy now. Let your breath go slow. Let the great cold world and its giants fade softly into the dark, the way the ice itself drew back, gently, over long ages, without any fear. The mammoths are moving somewhere out on the plain of sleep. The fire is burning low. The people are gathered close and warm. And so, now, may you sleep too, deeply and easily and well. Whenever you find yourself here again, in the dark, in need of a little peace and an old quiet story to carry you down into sleep, the fire at the calm archive will be burning low, and there will always be a place kept for you beside it. Rest now. Sleep well. Good night.